thing that we have today are two interim committee reports, and we have our expert here, Eddie Penner, who is going to start. And so do you want to begin with the Joint Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Benefits?
If that's the committee's preference, I'm happy to do so.
And we do have the report. You have a folder that has a report in it. Thank you. You can start whenever you wish.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As she indicated, my name is Eddie Penner. I work down in legislative research with Leanne and Iraida. I am the Assistant Director for Research and Principal Economist there. Historically, I've had somewhat of a tertiary role in pensions and financial institutions issues within the department. However, this most recent interim, due to some staff turnover in our office and also some of the other assignments for analysts, I kind of had to step into a role of being a bit more of a point person for those two subject areas. And so while I'm not really the subject area expert you might want for these areas, I hopefully can stand in well enough and pinch hit today on that topic. Just to start, a little background on what you see in our office's interim committee reports, since that might make it a little bit easier to follow along with me today. They typically start with a first page that is more or less a cover page, includes some administrative information related to the committee, its membership, but also the charge that committee has received from the LCC, which is an important part of interim committees, as they really are supposed to focus their study and their recommendations on the charge that they receive for the LCC, and in some cases statutory charges as well. Next, we have kind of a gray box is how we refer to it in our office, but it's a summary of the conclusions and recommendations of the committee. That same information is found sometimes in more detail farther along down in the report, but then you get into the background of the report itself, or the substance of the report itself, which includes kind of background information that led to the interim committee need for study, some specifications as it relates to the actual activities of the committee, and then a final concluding section that includes the discussion and recommendations of the committee. And so starting with the Pension Investment and Benefits Committee, on that very first page, I do want to highlight the charge of the committee. This is a statutory joint committee, so it meets annually. It's not one of the kind of ad hoc interim committees that we also have in the legislature. And so it has both a statutory charge, and then on an annual basis, the LCC gives it kind of a further charge of specific issues that it wants to study. And so the statutory charge is essentially three parts for this joint committee, that it monitor, review, and make recommendations regarding investment policies and objectives formulated by the KPERS board, is the first part. The second part has kind of some subparts that it make recommendations relating to benefits for KPERS members, the confirmation of members of the KPERS board. This joint committee can kind of serve as a confirmation oversight board for specifically KPERS, and then also a specific inclusion of city and county correctional officers as members of KP&F retirement system. And then the third statutory charge is to review reports related to working after retirement exceptions. The KPERS system has specific rules as it relates to working after retirement and specific exceptions to those rules, and this committee is charged with reviewing those on an annual basis. This interim, the LCC kind of assigned two specific follow-up assignments for the committee to review, and that is the implementation of kind of a KPERS omnibus piece of legislation last year. That was House Bill 2711. And then also possible options related to the Tier 3, or the KPERS Tier 3 plan design and the kind of overall benefit value of that tier. And it's my understanding that the committee has already heard from KPERS this year on a number of topics, and so I'm actually not going to go into a lot of detail in terms of some of the substance of the meeting, since it probably pretty closely aligned with what you received from KPERS. This interim committee in many ways kind of serves as an expanded version of the sort of in-session reports you get from KPERS, whereas you have an hour with Alan and Jared, or maybe multiple days. In some cases, this interim committee has a whole day, and in some years, multiple days with them to dig a bit more deeply into those details of KPERS and its kind of annual status information. So I'm going to skip over the gray box, and we'll come back to it at the end, since it's kind of the conclusions and recommendations, and I don't really want to put the cart before the horse. The committee activities can kind of be grouped into what I would group kind of four different areas. The first of those is the review of most recent KPERS law and legislation, the staff from the revisor's office, of course, provided this, and that was kind of can be split out several ways. KPERS bills that were enacted into law in the 2024 session, which there were two of. One of those was 2711, which included quite a few different provisions, and the other one was HB 2483, which was really only tangentially a KPERS bill. It was primarily a post-audit bill, but one of the things it did was eliminate a statutory requirement that post-audit conduct specific recurring audits, and some of those were KPERS audits. The committee also touched on two specific other bills that received legislative consideration last year, and then just very briefly highlighted other bills that happened to be introduced related to KPERS but didn't necessarily receive any specific legislative consideration. And so that's the first thing that the committee did. The second thing it did was kind of what I would almost describe as KPERS housekeeping, and that is where it reviewed kind of annual reports, the actuarial status of KPERS, the kind of annual update on the pension obligation bonds, the proceeds of those, and the returns related to those. And then the third item within that is kind of the investment performance of the KPERS Trust Fund this year. Even though I'm sure you've heard this information from Alan, I will just highlight very briefly that the asset values as of December 31, 2023, which was the most recent annual report at the time of the committee meeting. I don't know if there is an updated version of this. It looks like Alan's nodding behind me, so I assume there is, was $27.6 billion, which represented a funded ratio of assets to liabilities of 74%, which was up from the previous year of 73.4%. The contribution rates are scheduled to continue on at the full actuarially required contribution rates into FY 2027. That rate is being reduced from 11.68% in 2026 down to 11.32% in 2027. And I should note that that is specifically the rate for the state and school group of employees, which is the largest group, I believe. It's certainly the largest group for this body to concern itself with. And then within the investment performance, I did just want to highlight that the KPERS Trust Fund performance in fiscal year 2024 had a positive return of 9.7%, which exceeded the actuarial rate of return of 7%, but did trail its policy index or asset class benchmark, which was 11% for the year. And so that was kind of what I would describe as the KPERS housekeeping items. The next thing that it tackles is also might accurately be described as KPERS housekeeping, but is a little bit different in nature than that, and that is specifically the KPERS operating budget update and the important update on the KPERS pension administration system modernization project that the KPERS has undertaken. The committee, of course, received reports on both of those. As this is obvious, sort of KPERS housekeeping, but in a different vein of housekeeping than the annual reports related to the contributions and the funded status and the performance of the investment returns. And then the final topic that the committee kind of broadly considered is what we've labeled within our report, and this is on page 7 of the report you've received, kind of contemporary KPERS topics and issues. This is the kind of key update on what are the things that are either new or emerging within the KPERS system, or what are the things that the legislature specifically wants a bit more study on. And so the first of those was the Deferred Retirement Option Program. The KPERS staff provided an update on that program and the implementation of it, and there was some legislative consideration at the end on that program regarding conclusions and recommendations of the committee, so I'll circle back around to that. Then the committee received an update on the changes to the alternative investments cap within the KPERS portfolio. HB 2711 increased that cap from 15% to 25%, and the KPERS board responded to that increase by updating the asset allocation or by undertaking a new asset allocation review project to evaluate allocation strategies in line with that increased cap, and is kind of slowly moving in the direction of that new cap. Of course, within pension funding, a large shift in the percent of something from one asset class to another class would be unusual, but small, slow, steady, incremental steps in that direction is what I believe the Capers Board interpreted the legislature to have in mind in increasing that cap. It's just that the legislature didn't want to come back and increase it by 0.5% or 1% every year in a row for 5 or 6 or 8 years. Next, the committee received an update on the proxy voting status, which was required by HB 2100, I believe, from the 2023 session. And then finally, the committee pivoted to the Capers 3 plan design and received quite a bit of information on that topic in terms of an overview of the differences between Capers 3 and Capers 1 and 2 being a cash balance style plan as opposed to your very traditional defined benefit retirement plans, which Capers 1 and Capers 2 are. And then it highlighted kind of all of the levers within that Tier 3 cash balance plan that feed into the ultimate outcome of the retirement benefits to retirees, and the places where the legislature might specifically want to evaluate, is this a place where if we want to do something on the topic of Capers 3, are these levers where we might want to tweak something? The committee did receive input from representatives of the Kansas Coalition of Public Retirees and a single representative representing the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, and Kansas Peace Officers Association that addressed specific issues related to Capers 3 and indicated that for purposes of their memberships, Capers 3 does pose issues as it relates to recruitment and retention of specific employees. Most notably, the ones that they highlighted were dispatchers and jailers on the kind of public safety side of things. And then finally, the committee reviewed cost of living adjustments and the history and issues associated with those, and they received input from the same conferees on the topic of cost of living adjustments. The committee then had 4 specific conclusions and recommendations. These are the same on page 9, the last page of the report, as they are in the gray box. The committee specifically wanted to make clear in its recommendations that it was recommending that the legislature consider these items and not that the legislature necessarily undertake any one specific of them or any specific version of them that might be available, but it did recommend specific legislative consideration of these topics. The first of those would be an extraordinary Capers payment of $1 billion. In fiscal years 2023 and 2024, the legislature, through a couple of different pieces of legislation, provided for extraordinary payments to the Capers Trust Fund that I believe totaled $1.125 billion across 2 different fiscal years there, and kind of, I believe, 3 or 4 different payments to the trust fund. And so the purpose of this further payment would be to continue on in the reduction of the Capers unfunded actuarial liability. The next recommendation of the committee was that the appropriate standing committees of the legislature, of which this might be one, continue to research and study the deferred retirement option program, including potential advantages or disadvantages of, the only word that we included in the report here was expanding the program. We probably could have said expanding and extending the program, because that program does have a specific kind of end of life under current statute, and I believe the committee probably would appreciate the legislature considering if we want to expand it, do we also want to extend it as it currently exists? The third recommendation was that the committee recommend that the appropriate standing committees of the legislature review cost of living adjustments, but specifically the fiscal impact of implementing a cost of living adjustment. And they had specific concern that whatever the legislature do as it relates to cost of living adjustments be financed at the time of enactment and financed in such a way that it does not increase the unfunded actuarial liability of the Capers system. And then the final concern of the committee was that it recommend that the appropriate standing committees of the legislature, of which this might be one, continue to research and study potential enhancements to the Capers 3 plan, and once again recommended that any changes to that Capers 3 plan be financed at the time of enactment and not in such a way as to increase the unfunded actuarial liability of the KPERS Trust Fund. On that KPERS 3 topic specifically, the sense of the committee, and this is some staff interpretation of it, is that the committee wanted to not use a blunt instrument where a sharp instrument might be more appropriate. There are some things that you could do to KPERS 3 that might be most effectively described as blunt instruments, and those might have unintended consequences or unforeseen costs. And the committee wanted the legislature to specifically consider very specifically identifying what the issues are with KPERS 3 and how those specific issues might be addressed through a narrowly tailored tool as opposed to something that might have other consequences. And so with that, I would happily stand for questions on the report of the Joint Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Benefits. The only thing I do want to mention is sometimes we just refer to this committee as Joint KPERS. It's the same thing if you hear it shortened.
Full, isn't it? Thank you, Eddie. So committee, Michael Fagg and I were both, our vice chair, were on this joint committee, as you can see. But what I would tell you is the House has taken up a lot of the KPERS bills, and they are working on some of those recommendations. So once they have completed their work after turnaround, they'll end up in our committee. So, and we also have the Executive Director, Alan Conroy, here, who can lend help with any questions you might have, if that's necessary. So committee questions? Any thoughts on this? I know you're dying to get assigned to this, so Joint Committee on Pensions, Benefits, and Investments. Senator Argabright, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a comment on the findings. Appreciate how the committee put some language in there to make sure that if we act upon anything, that we are not disrupting the structure of our system. And so I appreciate that, and I think this is a very informative document. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Nope. Thank you. This really is a pretty interesting committee because we do know that we need to do some work on Tier 3. Yesterday, Senator Francisco introduced a bill on a COLA. So we're attuned to this, but we also don't want to increase our unfunded liability. And so we all are very interested and concerned, and we'll make sure that we make good decisions. Senator Fagg, I led you to another statement, didn't I?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for your presentation. And, you know, one thing, number one, our people that were here before us didn't fund this the way it was supposed to. So anybody new on the committee, you need to understand there's years that we didn't fund this. So we get to decide how we take care of this. So when you look at this $9.7 billion, that's a big number. And one thing that I've been thinking about here lately, the 74 point whatever it is, our goal is 100%. I mean, we talk about getting to 80 and then we go with this kind of thing. The other thing I would tell you is that we can be proud of our KPERS. When you look in today's market and all the extras that this adds to this, we have a good product and we got a great team that works on this stuff. One thing that caught my eye that I've been thinking about is that when you look on page, I got 505, we got 3 debts out there. So when we talk this 74% and how this is going right now, that is by itself. The state is encumbered debt of $1.5 billion that still we're paying on. So if you look at that whole picture, the $1.5 billion plus what we're doing, that's kind of the whole thing for the state. So this thing is a big number, bigger than we realize. So we have to be very careful about how we do this. This is my 5th year, and every year we come up here, everybody's wanting to do enhancements on this. And it's one of those kind of things, I'd like to have a year work on other things with this. So that's just my personal feeling about this.
Thank you, Senator Fagg. And I would echo some of your thoughts. So when I came into the legislature in the House, and I'm sure both of you senior members here are aware of this, we were not making those actuarial required payments to Capers. And so when I came in 2017, everybody was worried that Capers was not on good footing, not on good standing. So to echo what Senator Fagg said, we did make some pretty large investments in Capers, made up some back payments, did some bonding. And, you know, one of the things that I feel very comfortable with is that we have a very well-managed Capers retirement system. I think Executive Director Conroy and his staff have done a phenomenal job. His board, great investments, good returns. We do have a couple glitches that we need to address, and these recommendations that you see are some of those things that we're talking about and thinking about. So, I don't know, Executive Director Conroy, do you want to say anything at all? Okay, you're welcome to. Okay. Okay, all right. All right. Eddie, no more questions or comments? Senator Haley.
Madam Chair, just reference, was that 2017? Was that the $1 billion that we were sending?
In 17, was it a billion?
Talk us into doing that, and a lot of us were, some of us were hesitant, but it came out all right. I remember I was one of the ones that supported it, and so that was the good, better return on, was it $1 billion or so?
I believe.
The Capers bonding that was $1 billion was actually 2015. I believe it was actually 2017 where the state delayed certain specific payments to the Capers school group through the Department of Education budget. But I believe since then it has actually fully paid off those delayed payments as well. Yeah.
Well, Senator Jennings said it would. He said it'd be a good investment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
We have one more report. Would you like to? Now, this one's a little more complicated title.
Yes, this is one of our wordier titles, and to be honest, if I had thought about this, how many times I was going to have to say the name of this committee, I probably would have come up with a shorter title for the committee. But this is a special committee, which is not a statutory joint committee. This is just an ad hoc committee, kind of a one-off committee, and of course, unless it is recreated in the future, but it's the Special Committee on Centralized Pooled Collateral and PMIB modernization, PMIB standing for the Pooled Money Investment Board. That's the state agency that handles much of the state's money, both for the state government and for local governments. And this committee was created this year and was directed by the LCC to study the centralized pooled collateral for public funds and the Pooled Money Investment Board linked to deposit loan modernization, as well as potential impacts of increased investment in Kansas communities. And there was specific concern as it related to studying proposed legislation from last session, but also an economic study that was pending during last legislative session that was since completed prior to the meeting of this committee in the fall. And so I'm not going to go through the structure of this report because it's essentially the same. I'll jump right into the background. And the important thing that might be especially relevant as it relates to this report is that last year, the House Financial Institutions and Pensions Committee had a bill introduced, HB 2840, that would have created a single centralized pooled collateral system as it relates to the investment of public funds. That bill was introduced relatively late in the session. The House Committee didn't have time to I believe, even hear it, much less take it up and act upon it, and it didn't come to the Senate at all. But that bill was in many ways the background and genesis of this special committee. And the background for that is that this committee kind of worked on really 2 or 3 separate topics, depending upon exactly how you want to group them. One is that idea of a single centralized pooled collateral system that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Another are kind of just a mix of administrative issues as it relates to the laws that underpin the investment of public funds within financial institutions. And then the third one, which is really a separate and distinct issue, but closely enough related because it's still related to the administration of public funds, is examining the linked deposit programs that the state has. And so that centralized pooled collateral, just as a little bit of background, when local units of government put their money into banks, anything in excess of the $250,000 FDIC insured amount has to be collateralized in some way by the financial institution. And under our current law, it is done on a deposit by deposit basis. And so if a bank has deposits from 10 local units of government, it has 10 separate collateralization pools that it has for those. And typically, a bank would collateralize them a little bit more than the market value of the actual deposit due to potential fluctuations of the deposit amount or potential fluctuations of the market value of the assets that are being used to collateralize those deposits. And what this bill would have provided for, and what the interim committee was studying, was rather than having a deposit by deposit collateralization, what if we just had a single centralized pool where the collateral for all of the deposits of that institution were put into a single pool, and as long as that exceeded the total difference between the deposits and the FDI insured amount, that would suffice as appropriate collateralization for all of those deposits at the institution. This kind of takes out a couple of different factors. It takes out, one, some of the administrative burden of that collateralization, but also it takes out the over-collateralization issue. It allows for a certain efficiency as it relates to that, because banks typically over-collateralize those deposits, each and every single one of them, to where sometimes that adds up to a large amount of over-collateralization, whereas within a single centralized pool, they would just be able to be kind of over-collateralized once for the entire pool. And so that's kind of the relevant background. The committee heard first, though, input on just kind of the general economic investment of differing public fund investment approaches. And this was presented by a professor at Fort Hays State University. It was an economic impact study, and what the report specifically concluded was that when local government funds are invested outside of the state, it generally leads to fewer economic development opportunities and reduced tax revenues for state and local governments. And that's true, according to the conclusions of the study, even when the interest rate for the deposits of those public funds is higher at those out-of-state institutions up to a certain point. And the reason for that is that the conclusions of the study were that when those public funds are invested at local financial institutions, they're available for local lending by those financial institutions, and that would be available capital or credit for local economic development projects, which of course would result in a higher amount of economic activity at the local level. The report did conclude that there is a certain break-even point where if the out-of-state or non-local interest rate is so much higher than the locally available rate that it is different, that it does work out to the benefit for that those funds to be invested non-locally, but the break-even rate that it determined was 3.15 percentage points difference. So if the local rate of return was 2.5%, the non-local rate of return would have to be 5.65% or greater in order for the benefit for kind of the total system to be such that it's in the best interest of the local and state governments for those funds to be invested outside of the local area. Now, there were a lot of assumptions that underpin that calculation, and those assumptions were presented to the committee, and those are available in that specific report. And if you make small tweaks to those assumptions, you can get relatively different outcomes, but that is kind of the baseline assumptions within that report. So after receiving that report, the committee did receive a presentation and a briefing from the revisor's office on the actual contents of HB 2840 that was in the House Committee on pensions, financial institutions and pensions last year. It then also received input from representatives of various financial institutions, both the Kansas Bankers Association and the Community Bankers Association, as well as two separate financial institutions within Kansas that do receive deposits of public funds. And then it also received input from the state of Nebraska. They have a single centralized pooled collateral program in Nebraska that they've had in place since 2020, and that representative provided some insight in terms of the learning curve that they had in enacting that, as well as an update that once they got it off the ground and up and running, they've had absolutely no issues as it relates to the administration of that program. In Nebraska, the insurance subsidiary of the Nebraska Bankers Association, I don't know that it's the exact same name, but it's kind of the equivalent organization as the Kansas Bankers Association, is who operates that centralized pooled collateral program, but they highlighted that it doesn't actually need to be done that way, and the only reason they're the operator for it is that they are who, it was bid out in terms of the operation of that in Nebraska. And then from there, the committee on its second day pivoted entirely to the linked deposit programs. It received an overview from kind of jointly the executive director of the PMIB and from the state treasurer on the linked deposit programs that exist in Kansas, and then also just some kind of guiding principles for public fund deposits. Of course, their highest priority in the investment of public funds is the security of the funds. And then secondary concerns relate to, first, liquidity of the funds, making sure that not only they do come back, but that they're available when the state or local governments need them. And then the kind of tertiary concern is the actual return on investment of those funds. From there, based upon those reports, the committee did make what amount to 8 recommendations, and it recommended that those 8 recommendations be incorporated in 2 bills to be introduced by the House Committee on Financial Institutions and Pensions. However, and one of those bills has been introduced and read in, and it is HB 2152. I believe the second of those bills was introduced by the committee yesterday and is likely to be read in either today or tomorrow on the House floor. But the 8 recommendations, in my mind, can kind of be grouped into 3 areas, and I'll mention those groupings, but then mention how they are allocated across the 2 bills. The first of those is the top bullet point, and that's creating a centralized collateral pool program, and that is what was in last year's HB 2840, and it is part of the contents of HB 2152. The next group is the next 6 bullet points. Those are all kind of administrative provisions as it relates to the deposit of local government public funds. Those are also parts of HB 2152. And then the final bullet point is just a general rework of all of the state's linked deposit loan programs to remove what might be provisions that are outdated restrictions or generally impair the competitiveness and usefulness of the Kansas programs. Part of the state the PMIB and state treasurer's presentation highlighted the fact that the linked deposit loan programs in Kansas are not widely used. The one of those that was for specifically utility payments at the time of the 2021 winter storm, I believe its name was Winter Storm Uri. It was mid-February of 2021 where natural gas prices spiked in very dramatic ways. That one was widely used at that time. It had a sunset and is no longer active, but there are still active loans within it. It's not receiving new applications. And the other ones are generally not widely used and in some cases generally not used. And so the committee didn't make any specific recommendations in terms of what those reworkings should include, but recommended that the appropriate committees undertake to do so. And so with that, I would stand for questions on this interim committee report.
Thank you. Thank you, Eddie. Committee, do you have any questions on the recommendations? Or you've heard that these bills are over on the House side, so let's assume they're going to get a hearing, get worked, and then they'll end up over here. So we'll get another opportunity to talk about this. Any questions? Senator Fack.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to say this before I forget about it. Too many things float around up here. Could you look up Series 20004C? I see we owe $292 million on that, rate's 5.39. Is there any cost to that if we pay that off early? You know, some of those do have a cost, so if you check into that, I'd appreciate it.
This is back on the Capers report. Okay, yeah, I'll check into that for you.
Committee, any other questions? If not, thank you, Eddie, for being here. Really appreciate it. A lot of good, useful information. I know you're supposed to be in tax, so, but we're such a much nicer committee. Bye. All right, committee, we will, at this time, open up the hearing on Senate Bill 32. Eileen, would you like to brief us on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 32 would reduce the insurance company premium tax rate from 2% to 1.98%. and would also discontinue the remittance of 1% of the taxes received to the Insurance Department Service Regulation Fund. Section 1 of the bill amends KSA 40-112 pertaining to the Insurance Department Service Regulation Fund. The amendment appears in subsection B and, as you can see, strikes the requirement that 1% of the taxes received pursuant to KSA 40-252 be transferred to the treasurer and then ultimately be credited to the Insurance Department Service Regulation Fund. Section 2 amends KSA 40-252 pertaining to taxes and fees paid by insurance companies and fraternal benefit societies. And under current law, insurance companies pay a 2% tax on the total of all premiums, subscription charges, and other charges. This bill would essentially lower the tax rate on those entities by 1%, decreasing the tax rate from 2% to 1.98%. The bill also adds language to the statute requiring that all reports and returns required by this bill and rules and regulations adopted pursuant thereto shall be preserved for 3 years and thereafter until the commissioner orders them destroyed. And again, as we always do, we clean up grammatical issues and do our witch hunt. And with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for questions.
Committee, thank you, Eileen. Do you have any questions of the reviser? All right, thank you. I have no questions today. All right, so at that juncture then, we have testimony today from Insurance Department. Eric, you want to come forward? Introduce yourself, because we don't know who you are.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Eric Turek from the Kansas Department of Insurance. This is a very simple bill, as the reviser stated its purpose. The department collects and remits the 2.0% premium tax on the grant majority of insurance companies operating in Kansas. That 2% is on their gross written premium. And again, that's entirely remitted to the SGF except for 1% of all revenue collections, and that's retained by the department. The bill simply would repeal that 1%. That the department keeps, and the overall premium tax rate would be reduced by the difference. So happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Eric. Of course, testifying as a proponent. Any questions, committee? Any concerns? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're saying that this $2 million goes to SGF. Eric, is that what we're saying?
Madam Chair, I'll clarify. The $2 million in the fiscal note, that is the revenue that would go to the department that the bill is removing. The proceeds to the revenues to the SGF would remain unchanged. So the 1% of all collections that the department keeps, that's being eliminated, so the department would not keep that 1%, and then the overall rate would be reduced by the difference. So the SGF is not changing at all.
Thank you.
Very good question. Any other questions for Eric? Senator Gossage.
I thought I understood, and now I just feel confused. So at the bottom of page 4, and several, I guess, another time in here, so you're striking the 1% for tax year, it says 1997, and then 2% for tax year 2025, and then 1.98 for tax year 2026 and all other tax years thereafter. So could you explain what?
Yes, very gladly to. The 1% of all the proceeds that the department collects translates into 0.02% of the total premium tax rate. So the 1.98 is a reflection of that cut.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Francisco, question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Senator Gossage's question, my understanding is that it would have been 1% up to 1997 and then changed. So that's just striking wording that we no longer need in the bill. But my question is, what is the effect going to be on insurance companies? And would there be any reason, just because 2% is easier to figure than 1.98, that we keep 2% for the state general fund?
Eric, you may answer.
Sure. Madam Chair,
I'm not an accountant, so I can't speak to how simple 2% versus 1.98 might be. I will say that the premium written in Kansas can be totally variable, so I'm not sure that this would really have an effect there. I think that if there's an opportunity for companies to pay less in premium tax, I think that they will be generally supportive of that.
Does that answer your question, Senator Francisco? Any other questions, committee? Okay. Oh, Senator Gossage, yes.
Maybe it says it somewhere else in the bill. I'm just trying to see in that paragraph, Eric, it says, in addition to the above fees, and as a condition precedent to the continuation certification of authority provided in the code, every corporation or association shall pay annually to the Commissioner of Insurance. So I'm not seeing where it goes into the SGF.
One moment. I might defer also to the reviser to assist in finding the exact location.
Eileen? Would you like to assist?
No, and I might point the reviser to page 1, line 18.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Gossage, is your question about the 1% that's being discontinued, or is it about where the taxes go to the SGF?
No, I thought it was mentioned about that they will just hold that they will hold a portion of the funds that would go to SGF, but it's showing that it all goes to the commissioner. So I was trying to find a place where it said the commissioners shall forward
Okay,
those funds.
so if you look at section 1 of the bill in subsection B.
I see it now.
See after, okay, so you got me, or do I need to keep going?
No, that's all I needed. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Eric. I don't see any opponents. There's no neutral. So we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 32. And if we can, I'd like to work one bill, committee. It's 10:15. It shouldn't take too long. If you don't mind, let's just start with Senate Bill 21. Eileen, would you like to rebrief us on that?
I will briefly rebrief you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 21 is the bill that would require third-party administrators to maintain separate fiduciary accounts for their individual payers and not commingle funds. This is also the bill that would require third-party administrators to disclose to the Commissioner of Insurance any bankruptcy petition filed by or on behalf of the administrator pursuant to Chapter 9 or Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code.
Committee, what's the will of the committee here? Senator Warren?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is the one I had an amendment on regarding what does immediately mean.
Give me 1 second to find it. I know I put it in here. I do.
We think you do.
Thank you.
I do.
While Eileen is looking for that amendment, I will mention that we had a cancellation on a hearing, so Senate Bill 55 that we were going to hear on Thursday. We will revise our agenda, but you can strike that. And again, any bills that we don't work today or get to, we'll just roll over to tomorrow. And tomorrow will be a presentation by our pharmacists. There'll be a couple pharmacists here, along with about 250 of their friends in the building, but they'll do a presentation on the Pharmacy Association.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I have the file electronically. If our AV person can slap it on the screens, or we can defer this and do it tomorrow, and I can actually be prepared.
Is that all right with you, Senator Warren? We'll just defer to that be.
That's fine, Madam Chair. Thank you.
I can email it. He's willing to do that. That's fine. Okay,
I like paper, so let's wait until tomorrow. Shall we take a look at Senate Bill 22 then? Committee, Eileen, could you brief that one?
sure. Senate Bill 22 is the bill that would require title agents to make their audit reports available for inspection instead of submitting those reports annually. It would also require the amount of surety bonds filed with the Commissioner of Insurance to be standardized at $100,000 and would eliminate the controlled business exception in certain counties. And there is a balloon that I have on that one.
Thank you. Eileen? No, go ahead, yeah.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. The balloon here is the request by the department to amend the effective date to January 1 of 2026. And you can see that on the back half of the balloon that you're getting, it's just in section 5, the effective date portion of the bill.
Committee, as soon as you get that, you'll see on page 15 of the bill, we're just changing that enactment date. That's what this balloon amendment does, which is what Eileen just said. January 1, 2026. Senator Gossage?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the amendment.
Is there a second? Senator Francisco seconds. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of changing that date and approving the amendment to January 1, 2026, say aye. Any opposed? Okay, so moved, that's passed. All right, back on the bill. Senate Bill 22, do we have a motion? Committee? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move that we move Senate Bill 22 as amended out of committee, approved.
Favorably for passage?
I was trying to think of the wording of that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, excuse me, if I may,
Yes.
would this be appropriate time to talk about putting it on the consent calendar? And
Because
I-
it's amended, we
had not,
can't.
I'm saying.
Yeah, anytime we amend a bill, it can't
We
go on the
amended it.
consent calendar.
Thank you, I
Yeah.
apologize.
Thank you for asking, though. Senator Argerbright, did you want a second? Okay. Any discussion then? Okay. Committee, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Senate Bill 22 will be moved out of committee as amended favorably for passage. We'll turn that in. Committee, we are done for today. We will work 21 and 23 tomorrow, and we have the pharmacy presentation. So I don't know that it will be an exceedingly long meeting, but we'll get some good work done. Thank you so much. Meeting adjourned.